In 2023, the financial advice sounded almost unanimous. Buy property now or get priced out forever. Every finance channel, real estate influencer, mortgage broker, and investment podcast repeated the same message nonstop. Rates might be high, but waiting was supposedly even more dangerous. People were told that owning property, any property, was automatically the smart financial move. And honestly, millions listened. They stretched their budgets, emptied savings accounts for down payments, accepted massive monthly payments, and convinced themselves the stress was temporary because real estate always goes up. But here's the part nobody wanted to say publicly back then. A huge percentage of those buyers were not purchasing financial freedom. They were purchasing financial fragility, disguised as wealth. And in 2026, many of them are quietly discovering something deeply uncomfortable. The property itself was never the problem. The timing, leverage pressure, cash flow strain, and psychological assumptions behind the purchase were. And that lesson is becoming unbelievably expensive now. Nobody asked the obvious question in 2023. What happens if you buy property at the absolute edge of your financial capacity during one of the highest monthly payment environments in modern housing history? Because most buyers weren't calculating ownership from a position of safety. They were calculating from a position of fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of permanent unaffordability. Fear that everyone else would become wealthy through property while they stayed renters forever. And fear creates terrible investing behavior. It convinces people that stretching is temporary, that appreciation will save them, and that future income growth will magically solve present-day financial strain. But the market doesn't care about optimism. Monthly payments still arrive. Repairs still happen. Insurance still rises. Property taxes still increase. And suddenly, thousands of homeowners discovered something almost nobody explained during the buying frenzy. Owning an expensive asset with weak cash flow and no liquidity reserve feels very different emotionally once the excitement of the purchase disappears. Here's the reality hitting many 2023 buyers now. In multiple major markets, the total monthly cost of ownership exploded far beyond the original mortgage payment people plan around. Insurance premiums surged. Property taxes reset higher. HOA fees increased. Maintenance costs inflated aggressively. And homeowners who bought near their maximum affordability threshold suddenly found themselves spending 50% or more of their take-home income just maintaining the illusion of financial progress. That's the gut punch nobody anticipated emotionally. On paper, many of these people technically built equity, but in real life, they became financially trapped. Vacations disappeared. Investing slowed or stopped completely. Emergency savings evaporated after one major repair. Some owners even started carrying credit card debt, while simultaneously calling themselves wealth builders because a house appreciated slightly on Zillow. And this is where the psychology breaks. Because once your home consumes most of your liquidity, the property stops feeling like an asset emotionally. It starts feeling like a full-time financial responsibility that never turns off. The reason this myth survives is because real estate success stories are incredibly visible while real estate stress stays mostly private. Nobody uploads a YouTube video titled, "My escrow payment increased again, and now I can't invest anymore." People post renovation photos, appreciation screenshots, and closing day celebrations because ownership signals progress socially. And to be fair, over very long periods, real estate absolutely can build wealth. But the online version sold in 2023 removed almost all nuance from the equation. It ignored liquidity risk. It ignored behavioral stress. It ignored the difference between owning property comfortably versus surviving property financially. And most importantly, it ignored how dangerous leverage becomes when monthly cash flow is already tight. But saying buy responsibly below your means with strong reserves and long-term flexibility doesn't go viral. Buy now before you're locked out forever does. Fear-based urgency always spreads faster online than financially balanced advice because panic emotionally feels more actionable than patience in the moment. The real issue was never property itself. It was sequence. Real estate works best as a wealth amplifier after financial stability already exists, not as a rescue strategy before stability exists. That distinction changes everything. The people handling their 2023 purchases well today usually had strong liquidity, low debt pressure, large emergency reserves, and income margins wide enough to absorb rising costs without panic. They bought from strength. Everyone else bought from urgency. And urgency creates fragile financial architecture. Here's what actually builds durable wealth long-term. Stable cash flow first, liquidity second, automated investing third, and leverage only after those systems are secure. Because leverage magnifies whatever financial condition already exists underneath it. If you're stable, leverage accelerates wealth. If you're financially stretched, leverage accelerates stress. That's a mechanism almost nobody explained during the housing frenzy. Real estate was never guaranteed freedom. It was simply a multiplier. And multipliers become dangerous when the underlying financial foundation is already unstable to begin with. The biggest mistake people made in 2023 was confusing approval capacity with affordability. Banks told buyers what they technically qualified for, and buyers assumed that meant they could safely handle the payment long term. Those are completely different calculations. Qualification formulas do not measure psychological stress, future layoffs, rising insurance, burnout, lifestyle restriction, or the emotional pressure of carrying massive fixed obligations during uncertain economic years. They measure whether the loan mathematically closes today. That's it. And because people anchor emotionally to the idea of building equity, they ignore the opportunity cost happening underneath the surface. Investment stopped. Liquidity disappeared. Career flexibility vanished because losing income was no longer an option. Some people even stayed in jobs they hated purely to protect the mortgage payment attached to a house they barely enjoyed anymore. That's the trap. They optimize for ownership status instead of financial resilience. And once resilience disappears, even a good asset can begin creating a deeply fragile financial life emotionally. If I were approaching property in 2026 after watching what happened to many 2023 buyers, I would reverse the entire strategy. First, I would build liquidity aggressively before touching leverage. 6 to 12 months of real reserves. Not optimistic reserves. Real reserves. Second, I would prioritize cash flow margin over maximum property size every single time. Smaller payment. Lower stress. Higher flexibility. Third, I would continue automated investing even after purchasing property, instead of allowing the house to consume all future capital allocation. That's the part most people miss. Wealth grows strongest when multiple systems compound simultaneously, not when one giant asset absorbs your entire financial life. And finally, I would buy property only when the payment still feels manageable during a bad year emotionally, not just a good year mathematically. Because markets change. Costs rise. Life becomes unpredictable. But financial resilience survives uncertainty better than optimism ever will. Property can absolutely create wealth long term. It just works far better when survival no longer depends on it succeeding immediately. The hardest part about rebuilding financial stability after a stretched property purchase is that the correction usually feels emotionally invisible at first. Selling, downsizing, rebuilding liquidity, delaying upgrades, restarting investments. None of those moves look impressive online. In fact, they can feel like failure temporarily. But over the next 5 to 10 years, the people who prioritize resilience over image will quietly separate themselves financially from the people still trapped maintaining appearances. Because eventually, optionality matters more than ownership status. The ability to survive layoffs, pivot careers, invest consistently, and make decisions without panic becomes more valuable than forcing yourself to hold an oversized financial obligation indefinitely. And that's the expensive lesson many 2023 buyers are learning now. Property can absolutely create long-term wealth, but only when the financial structure underneath it is strong enough to survive real life first. If this changed how you think about money, subscribe right now, because the next decade will financially reward resilience far more than fear-based investing ever did.